Anatomy students, welcome to our final lecture on the nervous system. Yeah, it's a bittersweet moment. We're going to be done with the nervous system right when we're done with this material on the autonomic nervous system. So, let's review for a second here. If we think about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, we know the peripheral nervous system is divided into a sensory division and a motor division, an afferent and an efferent division. And the motor division is divided into a somatic nervous system and an autonomic nervous system. And today, that's what we're doing. We're doing the autonomic nervous system, which of course, remember, has two divisions itself, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we're going to cover the autonomic nervous system. The word autonomic means self-governed. So you don't have any control over this. You don't have any voluntary control over it. All right? But we're going to look at what it does, what the parts are, a whole bunch of good stuff in store for us today. So let's get to it. All right. Two divisions to the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. I want you to remember these nicknames. We've said them before, but we're going to say them again. The sympathetic nervous system is also called the fight or flight system. Fight or flight system, okay? Parasympathetic is the rest and digest. When you're trying to figure out what these two divisions do, these little rhyming devices here are really helpful to figure that out. Okay. Let's talk about where the autonomic nervous system goes. Well, we already said it's involuntary. You don't control it. So it's going to go to things that are involuntary. Two types of muscle. And we see those two types of muscle here. On our left-hand side, take a look on the left there. Do you see that organ there? This, of course, is a heart. The wall of the heart, so this part right here, the wall of the heart is primarily made up of what? It is primarily made up of cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle. Looks like I spelled cardial muscle, but it's cardiac muscle. So your ANS goes to the cardiac muscle in the ventricle of the heart. Over here as well, cardiac muscle up in the atrium as well. Okay, this thing on the right here, you're probably wondering, what the heck is this purple thing here? Now, I know you guys love histology. We got some histology here, some microscopic stuff. This is a microscopic view of a different organ. It's not the heart. It's an abdominal organ. It starts with an S. It ends with an H. Who's going to shout that out? The answer, of course, is stomach. The answer is stomach. So we're looking at a slide of the stomach here, and this is the stomach wall. Now, inside the stomach wall, there is going to be a layer of muscle. We see that layer of muscle right here. That layer of muscle in the stomach wall is smooth muscle. So you don't control smooth muscle. It is also involuntary. It is under the control of your autonomic nervous system. Now, what's kind of neat about this picture, I can't help but point this out. Check out the folds in the wall of the stomach. Why do you think your stomach has folds? Well, when you eat, what happens to these folds? They're going to disappear. So these folds in the stomach, they disappear as you eat. They allow your stomach to expand. So if you're hungry right now, you probably have a bunch of these folds. If you're not hungry, if you just ate a delicious meal, then you're going to have fewer of these folds, if any. Okay, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Those are two effectors of our autonomic nervous system, but that's not all. There are also glands. So can you find the gland that I can see in this picture? I can see two glands actually in this picture. One gland is right here. This gland, of course, is the parotid gland. It's one of the major salivary glands. You know it because we talked about it when we talked about the glossopharyngeal nerve. Down here, we got another salivary gland. That is the submandibular gland. We mentioned it when we talked about the facial nerve. So, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Those are our three effectors of the ANS. So, that's good. We got our three effectors of the ANS. They're all involuntary. What we want to do right now, though, is contrast that to the somatic nervous system. Remember, of course, somatic has this part of the word right here, soma. Soma means body. So somatic nervous system controls the movement of your body, which means what kind of muscle? I know you're screaming it out right now. The kind of muscle is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle. And we see a bunch of skeletal muscles in this guy here. Ones we've met already, like the temporalis, like the masseter, like the orbicularis oris, orbicularis oculi, the platysma, the sternocleido. You've met these guys already. So our somatic nervous system is going to have skeletal muscle as its effector. And remember, skeletal muscle is mostly voluntary. So this nervous system is mostly voluntary. All right, that's good. Let's compare these guys a little bit further. Let's compare them also in terms of how we get to that effector. So I want to start with the somatic system. Up here at the top, got my cross section of the spinal cord. Over here I got my skeletal muscle. And check this out. We're going to have one single solitary motor neuron making its way from the cord to the muscle. The soma of that motor neuron is in the ventral horn. The axon comes out the ventral root into the spinal nerve and extends onward to the neuron. The neurotransmitter we're releasing right here is abbreviated ACH. That stands for acetylcholine. Check out these guys. Who are these guys right here? What cells are these? Say it loud. What cells are these? These, of course, are Schwann cells. So we got some serious myelination going on. We've got Schwann cells. Okay, so that is the basic pathway for the somatic nervous system, the way we get to skeletal muscle. That says skeletal right there. Okay, now let's contrast that with the autonomic plan here. Okay, down here, got my spinal cord again, got my heart over here, so cardiac muscle over here. Now, this time it's a 1-2 neuron pathway. So a 2 neuron pathway. The soma of the first neuron starting in the lateral horn. First neuron comes out, axon goes out the ventral horn, ventral root, spinal nerve, towards a ganglion. Remember a ganglion. What's a ganglion? A ganglion is a cluster. A cluster? Cluster of what? A cluster of somata. So here we have a synapse between our first and our second neuron. Acetylcholine released right there. Then our second motor neuron extends onward to the target tissue, to the effector, which in this particular example is cardiac muscle. So 2 neuron pathway as opposed to a 1 neuron pathway. Starting in the lateral horn as opposed to starting in the ventral horn. Heavily myelinated the whole way. This one's myelinated in the first part, but then unmyelinated in the second part. Definitely going to be slower in this pathway because we got a synapse to deal with and we got a unmyelinated neuron as the second part. And this unmyelinated second neuron here is going to either release acetylcholine or norepinephrine, depending on whether we are talking parasympathetic or sympathetic. So, the pathway differs. The target organ, the effector differs. The degree of voluntariness differs. These are all important things to be aware of as we contrast the autonomic versus the somatic nervous systems, the two types of motor efferent systems that we have. Okay, good stuff. Let's get rid of all that. Let's keep going. So, just another little more detailed picture of the same thing. Let's just review again. In the somatic nervous system, from the CNS to the target tissue, to the skeletal muscle, single neuron, heavily myelinated. Acetylcholine is our neurotransmitter. And we're adding something new here. The effect on the skeletal muscle is always stimulatory. So the only thing we can do to skeletal muscle is tell it, hey, contract. All right, that's all we can do. Now down here, this right here is my sympathetic pathway, and this down here is my parasympathetic pathway. We're going to ignore the guy in the middle right here for now. But in the sympathetic pathway, first neuron, myelinated, although not as heavily myelinated. Second neuron, unmyelinated, releasing acetylcholine at the synapse, which is going to be found in a ganglion, releasing norepinephrine at the target tissue. For the parasymp, first one here is lightly myelinated. Second one here is unmyelinated. Acetylcholine at both synapses. Now, our target tissue, like we said already, is either cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or glands. And the effect can be either stimulatory or inhibitory, depending on what's going on. Like, what neurotransmitter are we using? Which one of these guys is it? What kind of receptor is present on the effector? Those are considerations. So only stimulatory for your somatic nervous system, either stimulatory or inhibitory for your autonomic. All right, one more thing to point out here just real quick. Notice the labeling we gave. Since we have a 2-neuron pathway, it's a good idea to be able to distinguish the first from the second. The first neuron is said to be preganglionic because it's going towards this ganglion. So preganglionic here. The second neuron is postganglionic because it's coming out of the ganglion. It's after the ganglion. All right. With that, we are done with our comparison, and now we're going to start talking about the ANS in more detail. One of the interesting things about the autonomic nervous system is this concept of dual innervation. What this means is that most organs are innervated, in other words, get neurons from both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. If we look at this picture, on the left-hand side here, I got this brain up here, I got the spinal cord, and I see these sympathetic neurons coming out from T1 to L2. Sympathetic neurons going to the heart, to the lungs, to salivary glands, to digestive organs, and more. Over here on the right, I got parasympathetic neurons coming out of my brainstem and coming out of my sacral cord. And notice that for the majority of these organs here, they are getting neurons from both sides. So the heart, for example, getting sympathetic input, getting parasympathetic input. The lungs getting both as well. The salivary glands getting both as well. Now, it's almost all the organs are going to get this dual innervation. And the key idea about having both systems innervate the organs is it leads us to another concept. This idea of antagonistic control. So, here's a heart. I got a purple sympathetic and a blue parasympathetic here. When I give more sympathetic, more fight or flight stimulation, more norepinephrine to the heart rate is going to go up. When I give more parasympathetic, the blue guy here, stimulation to the heart, more acetylcholine on the heart rate is going to go down. So by having dual innervation, I can change things, okay, in two directions. In this example here, I can make heart rate go up with sympathetic stimulation, or I can make heart rate go down with parasympathetic. And what is that going to let us do? It's going to let us maintain heart rate. I can bring it up if I need to. I can bring it down if I need to. I can keep it in the correct range. What's the big important term that I'm spelling that describes this type of situation where we maintain body parameters within a certain range? You're right. It is called homeostasis. So having antagonistic control because of dual innervation allows us to maintain homeostasis. All right, this is tremendous. This is so good. Let's keep going though. The parasympathetic division, we have already nicknamed it the rest and digest division, but it has another nickname. It is also known as the D division because it is involved in several things that start the letter D, including digestion, defecation, and diuresis. So take a look at a typical lunch right here, steak and lobster tails, right? And if you're going to eat this, you're going to need to digest it. Digesting it is a parasympathetic activity. Later on, you're going to need to poop and pee. All right, defecation and diuresis, pooping and peeing. All three of these events are parasympathetic. Okay, kind of similarly, there is another nickname for the sympathetic division. It's called the E division. The E division, not just fight or flight, but the E division, because this division is turned on when you are excited, when you are exercising, when you are embarrassed, in an emergency. All E's here, thus the E division. So, if you had just broken 2 hours for the marathon, like Eliud Kipchoge here, you would be, in the midst of doing some exercise, you would be excited as well. If somebody's embarrassed, their sympathetic nervous system turns on. In an emergency stressful situation, their sympathetic nervous system turns on. Okay, we're doing good here, guys. We're doing really well. And there's more. There's always more. Just when you thought we were done. Now, you didn't think we were done. We're barely like a dozen slides into this. We got more to do. So, more nicknames, in fact. Check out the parasympathetic here on the left, sending out neurons from the brainstem and from the sacral part of the spinal cord. So, the parasympathetic division is also called the craniosacral division. So we got 3 nicknames for parasympathetic. It's rest and digest. It's the D division, and it is the craniosacral division. This is the most anatomical nickname that we have here. Now let's contrast that with the sympathetic system. Sympathetic system coming out in the thoracic and the lumbar cord. And because it's coming from the thoracic and lumbar cord, the sympathetic division is the thoracolumbar division. So, a lot of nicknames for sympathetic too. Fight and flight, fight or flight. E division, and the anatomical one is thoracolumbar. If we get a little bit more detailed, the parasympathetic, we said it was craniosacral. Well, if it is cranial, we know it's cranial nerves. And in fact, there's 4 of them. Cranial nerve number 3, number 7, number 9, and number 10. Anybody remember what these are? Number 3 starts with an O. It is the oculomotor. Number 7 starts with an F. It's facial. 9 starts with a G. Glossopharyngeal. 10 starts with a V. It's vagus. So 3, 7, 9, and 10. 3, 7, 9, 10. 3, 7, 9, 10. What's a good way to remember that? I don't know. 3, 7, 9, 10. Just keep saying it. Sacral nerves 2 through 4 are also going to be parasympathetic. Sacral nerves 2 through 4. There's a good way to remember this, but I cannot share it with you. You can probably figure out why. So as far as the sympathetic nerve roots, T1 through T12, then L1 to L2. So T1 to L2 are where you're going to find sympathetic nerves. Okay, good stuff. Let's double check that pathway and compare those two again. In both situations, 2-neuron pathway between the CNS and the target tissue. CNS, target tissue, 1, 2. There's always a ganglion where the 2 neurons meet. The first neuron is called the preganglionic. The second neuron is called the postganglionic. Sometimes called the ganglionic as well. First neuron always releases acetylcholine. Second neuron releases norepinephrine in the sympathetic pathway and acetylcholine in the parasympathetic. The myelination is not shown in this picture, but the first neuron is lightly myelinated. Second neuron is unmyelinated. Now, check this out here. There is another thing to consider, another difference that we did not mention before. It's the position of the ganglion. In the sympathetic pathway, the ganglion is located close to the spinal cord. In the parasympathetic pathway, the ganglion is far from the spinal cord or brain. So because of this distance, in the sympathetic pathway, the first neuron is short, second is long. Parasympathetic, first neuron is long, second is short. So we got another difference right there. And if we take a look, we can see it again. So coming out of our brainstem, first neuron takes a while to get to a parasympathetic ganglion. Then the second neuron goes a shorter distance to get to the target tissue. Down here, sacral, S2 to S4, first neuron takes a long way to get to the ganglions. Ganglion's far from the CNS, second neuron is short. Now, the sympathetic ganglia are closer to the spinal cord, meaning the first neuron is short and the second neuron is long. Okay, if we look at the pathway for our parasympathetic division, coming out of the brainstem, we already said there's 4 cranial nerves that are going to have parasympathetic motor fibers. Number 3, which is the oculomotor, it is going to the smooth muscle in your eyeball, which is going to let you dilate and constrict your pupil. Okay? Constrict your pupil, really. I shouldn't have said dilate. It's going to let you constrict your pupil there. Okay? Good. Number 7, the facial nerve. Coming out as well, going a long way, getting to that ganglion, and then going to the various glands that we have. Submandibular and sublingual glands, glands in the mucosa of the nasal cavity, plus the lacrimal gland. Parotid gland is the other salivary gland, and it is getting its motor fibers from the glossopharyngeal nerve. Again, coming out of the brainstem, going a long way, getting to the ganglion, short neuron to the gland. Now, number 10 is the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve comes out of the brainstem. This preganglionic is really, really long because we got to go all the way to the heart, for example, to the lungs, for example, and then very short neurons after that. Our vagus nerve also keeps on going down, so if we switch to the next one, we can see a similar situation for the vagus nerve going to the liver and to other digestive organs. Long preganglionic, short postganglionic. Similarly, between S2 and S4, we have preganglionic parasympathetics coming out of the cord, going to reproductive organs and, of course, to the urinary bladder and urinary tract. Long preganglionics, short postganglionics. All right. With that, we're going to quit right there. It's 25-ish minutes in. Our first ANS lecture is done. We'll do one more in a little bit. Until then, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.